The wooden bat felt foreign in Cho Min-ho's weathered hands as he stepped up to the makeshift home plate scratched into the dirt of the prison camp recreation field. The American guard behind him called out encouragingly in broken Korean, "Good swing. Keep eye on ball." Around the diamond, fellow North Korean prisoners crouched in unfamiliar positions, gloves borrowed from their captors hanging awkwardly from their hands. The pitcher, another prisoner who had been learning the game for weeks, wound up and delivered a slow, arcing throw that seemed to float forever in the bright Korean summer sky. It was July 1952, and Cho had been a prisoner of war for 8 months. In that time, he had witnessed many things that contradicted everything he had been told about American brutality: decent food, medical care, educational opportunities, even entertainment. But this moment felt different, more surreal somehow. Here he was, an enemy soldier, standing in a batter's box playing America's national pastime, while guards cheered him on and fellow prisoners shouted instructions in a mixture of Korean and broken English. Cho had been a carpenter before the war, crafting furniture and farm tools in a small village near the Chinese border. When the call came to defend the homeland against American imperialists, he had answered without question, trading his woodworking tools for a rifle and a uniform that never quite fit properly. The last time he had played any game was as a child, tossing stones at targets with his younger brother. The concept of organized sport for adults, especially for prisoners, was as foreign to him as the strange leather glove now dangling from his left hand. The pitch came in slow and straight, and Cho swung with all the awkward determination of a man trying to master something completely outside his experience. The bat connected with a solid crack that surprised everyone, including Cho himself. The ball sailed over the second baseman's head and bounced toward the makeshift fence that marked the outfield boundary. Prisoners on both teams erupted in cheers and laughter as Cho stood frozen at home plate, unsure what to do next. "Run, run," shouted Sergeant Williams, the American guard who had volunteered to teach the prisoners baseball during his off-duty hours. "First base. That way." Williams pointed toward the bag that marked first base, and Cho began a hesitant jog that quickly turned into a full sprint as he realized this was part of the game. He reached first base safely, breathing hard and grinning despite himself. This is the story of that hit and thousands like it. Moments of joy and confusion that would challenge everything these prisoners thought they knew about their enemies, themselves, and the nature of human competition and camaraderie. But more than that, it's the story of what these baseball games revealed about two fundamentally different approaches to warfare, recreation, and what it means to maintain humanity even in the most inhuman circumstances. The Korean War had begun in June 1950 with both sides confident of swift victory. North Korean forces, backed by Soviet equipment and Chinese volunteers, had swept across the 38th parallel expecting to reunify their divided homeland within weeks. Cho and thousands like him had marched south believing they were liberating their brothers from capitalist oppression, that the Americans were weak foreigners who would flee at the first sign of determined resistance. Instead, Cho found himself trapped in a grinding conflict that turned the entire Korean peninsula into a battlefield. By the time he was captured during the Chinese Spring Offensive in May 1951, his initial revolutionary fervor had been worn down by months of hunger, cold, and the brutal reality of modern warfare. He expected death when American soldiers found him wounded and hiding in a destroyed farmhouse near Seoul. What he didn't expect was to be treated according to the Geneva Convention, processed through a systematic intake procedure, and eventually housed in a prison camp that seemed more like a military base than the torture facility North Korean propaganda had prepared him to expect. The Americans provided regular meals, medical care, and even recreational opportunities that seemed impossible in the context of active warfare. The baseball program had begun almost by accident in the spring of 1952. Sergeant Williams, a former high school coach from Ohio, had noticed that many prisoners seemed listless during their free time, sitting in groups and staring at nothing or engaging in the kind of brooding that could lead to depression and behavioral problems. Williams had played baseball throughout his youth and understood instinctively that physical activity and competition could provide both exercise and mental distraction. His initial suggestion to the camp commander had been met with skepticism. "You want to teach enemy soldiers to play baseball?" Captain Morrison had asked. "What's next? Football tryouts?" But Morrison was a pragmatic officer who had learned that bored prisoners caused more problems than busy ones. If organized sports could keep the men occupied and improve camp morale, it was worth trying. The first challenge was equipment. The camp had no baseball gloves, bats, or balls designed for the purpose. Sergeant Williams improvised with whatever materials were available. Bats carved from lumber scraps by prisoners who had woodworking skills, balls made from tightly wound cloth and tape, gloves fashioned from canvas and stuffing. The diamond itself was laid out on a flat area behind the main barracks, with bases marked by wooden boards and a backstop constructed from wire mesh and wooden posts. Cho was among the first volunteers, drawn partly by curiosity and partly by boredom. The concept of the game had to be explained from scratch. The idea that two teams would take turns trying to hit a ball and run around bases while the other team tried to prevent them from doing so. The rules seemed arbitrary and unnecessarily complex to men accustomed to straightforward activities like farming, marching, and fighting. But Sergeant Williams was a patient teacher who understood that he was introducing more than just a game. He was sharing a fundamental aspect of American culture, a form of organized competition that embodied values of fairness, teamwork, and the possibility that skill and effort could overcome disadvantage. These concepts weren't entirely foreign to North Korean society, but they had been expressed through different activities, collective labor projects, political study groups, military drills. The first actual game was a disaster by conventional baseball standards. Players forgot to run after hitting the ball, fielders threw to the wrong bases, and the score became so lopsided that it lost all meaning. But something magical happened despite the confusion. Prisoners began to laugh. Not the bitter laughter of men mocking their circumstances, but the genuine joy that comes from shared absurdity and common effort toward a pointless but engaging goal. Cho discovered that he had a natural aptitude for hitting. His carpenter's hands, trained to precise movements and careful timing, adapted well to the challenge of connecting bat with ball. More importantly, he found that he enjoyed the mental aspects of the game, trying to anticipate where the ball would go, calculating when to swing and when to hold back, working with teammates to execute plays that required coordination and trust. The social dynamics of baseball proved as revolutionary as the physical activity itself. North Korean society was highly hierarchical, with clear distinctions between officers and enlisted men, party members and ordinary citizens, people of different ages and social backgrounds. But baseball seemed to operate according to different rules. A former private who could pitch effectively became as valuable as a former officer who couldn't hit. Age and political background mattered less than ability and effort. Park Dong-soo, a former lieutenant colonel who had initially been suspicious of the entire program, found himself playing right field alongside peasant farmers and factory workers who would never have been allowed to address him directly in North Korean society. On the baseball field, he later reflected, "We were just players trying to help our team win. The American game made us all equal in a way that our own system never had." The Americans watched these developments with fascination and some satisfaction. They had introduced baseball as a practical solution to camp management problems, but they gradually realized they were witnessing something more significant: the power of American culture to transcend political and social boundaries. The prisoners weren't just learning to play a game. They were experiencing American values of individual achievement, team cooperation, and fair competition. Sergeant Williams began to incorporate more sophisticated elements into the program as the prisoners' skills improved. He taught them about strategy, when to steal bases, how to position fielders for different batters, the mental game of pitcher versus hitter. He introduced concepts like batting averages and earned run averages, statistical measures that allowed players to track their improvement over time and compare their performance to teammates. These statistical concepts were revelatory for prisoners accustomed to societies where individual performance was rarely measured or acknowledged except in terms of political loyalty and collective contribution. The idea that a person's value could be quantified based on objective performance rather than subjective political evaluation was both liberating and slightly unsettling. By midsummer 1952, the baseball program had evolved into a regular league with multiple teams, scheduled games, and even primitive standings tracked on a board in the recreation hall. Prisoners began to identify strongly with their teams, developing loyalties and rivalries that had nothing to do with their pre-war backgrounds or political beliefs. Former enemies from different military units found themselves teammates, while men from the same village might become fierce competitors on opposing teams. The games became social events that drew spectators from throughout the camp. Prisoners who didn't play would gather along the foul lines to cheer for their favorites, argue about close calls, and debate strategy with the intensity of seasoned fans. American guards often joined these discussions, sharing their own knowledge of the game and marveling at how quickly their former enemies were mastering the intricacies of America's pastime. Cho emerged as one of the league's better players, combining his natural hitting ability with an intuitive understanding of the game's strategic elements. He learned to work counts, to hit behind runners, to take advantage of defensive positioning. More importantly, he learned to be a leader on his team, encouraging teammates who were struggling and sharing the knowledge he had gained through practice and observation. The leadership skills that baseball demanded were different from those emphasized in North Korean military culture. Instead of commanding through rank and authority, baseball leadership required persuasion, example, and the ability to help others perform at their best. Cho found himself becoming a different kind of person through the game, more collaborative, more encouraging, more willing to celebrate others' successes as well as his own. The contrast with North Korean approaches to physical activity was stark and illuminating. In North Korean society, physical exercise was typically organized around collective goals, building socialism, strengthening the military, demonstrating political commitment. Individual achievement was acknowledged only insofar as it contributed to group objectives, and competition was viewed with suspicion as potentially divisive and bourgeois. Baseball, by contrast, celebrated individual performance within a team context. A player could achieve personal success, getting a hit, making a great catch, pitching effectively, while simultaneously contributing to team victory. The game seemed to assume that individual excellence and collective achievement were complementary rather than contradictory, a concept that challenged fundamental assumptions about human nature and social organization. The American guards who supervised the baseball program were themselves learning from the experience. Many had never had extended contact with Asian people, and their pre-war understanding of North Korean society had been shaped by propaganda that emphasized the enemy's fanatical devotion to communist ideology. Watching these same fanatics argue about batting lineups and celebrate home runs provided a different perspective on their humanity and individuality. Corporal Johnson from Alabama, who had volunteered to help umpire games, later wrote to his family about the experience. These enemy soldiers who we were told were brainwashed robots turn out to be just men who like to compete and have fun like anybody else. When that fella Cho got his first triple last week, he grinned like a kid at Christmas. Hard to think of someone as an inhuman enemy when you've seen them slide into third base and dust off their pants laughing. The baseball program also revealed the impressive organizational capacity that characterized American military operations. Equipment that wore out was replaced, sometimes with items shipped from the United States specifically for prisoner recreation programs. When the original cloth balls became too damaged to use, genuine baseballs arrived from supply depots thousands of miles away. The improvised wooden bats were eventually supplemented with actual baseball bats, gloves, and other equipment that transformed the games from makeshift activities into something approaching organized sport. This casual demonstration of logistical capability was not lost on the prisoners. The same system that could deliver baseball equipment to enemy prison camps could deliver ammunition to frontline troops, medical supplies to field hospitals, and food to populations anywhere in the world. The baseball program was a small example of American industrial and organizational capacity that extended far beyond military applications. As autumn approached in 1952, the baseball season began to wind down due to cooling weather, but the program's impact on camp culture was permanent. Prisoners who had been strangers or even antagonistic toward each other had become teammates and friends. Men who had never considered the possibility of recreational activity as adults had discovered the joy of play and competition. Most importantly, they had experienced a form of American culture that challenged their preconceptions about capitalist society and individual versus collective values. The games had also provided unexpected opportunities for cultural exchange. Prisoners taught American guards Korean words related to baseball, how to say good hit or nice catch in Korean. while learning English baseball terminology that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Some prisoners began to understand that American culture might be more complex and appealing than their political education had suggested, while American guards gained appreciation for the intelligence, humor, and basic humanity of men they had been trained to regard as ideological enemies. Winter weather forced a temporary end to outdoor baseball, but the program's influence continued through indoor discussions about strategy, reminiscences about memorable plays, and planning for the following season. Prisoners who had been reluctant to engage in recreational activities now asked about other American sports and games. Some requested books about baseball history and famous players, leading to the establishment of a modest library that became another bridge between American and Korean cultures. The spring of 1953 brought renewed enthusiasm for baseball as weather permitted outdoor activities to resume. By this time, the Prisoner League had evolved into a sophisticated operation with multiple divisions, playoff systems, and even primitive forms of player development as experienced players helped train newcomers to the sport. The quality of play had improved dramatically, with some prisoners demonstrating genuine athletic ability that impressed even skeptical American observers. Cho had become one of the league's acknowledged stars, known for his consistent hitting and intelligent base running. More importantly, he had become a cultural ambassador of sorts, helping to explain American sporting concepts to newcomers while sharing his own insights about strategy and technique. The carpenter, who had never played organized sports as a child, had become a player coach whose knowledge and enthusiasm influenced dozens of other prisoners. The baseball program had also begun to influence how prisoners thought about competition and achievement more broadly. Some began to approach other camp activities, work details, educational programs, even political discussions, with the same spirit of fair competition and mutual respect that characterized their baseball games. The concept that opponents could compete intensely while maintaining personal respect for each other was revolutionary for men raised in a culture where political disagreement was treated as personal betrayal. As armistice negotiations intensified during the spring and summer of 1953, the baseball program took on new poignancy. Prisoners faced the possibility of repatriation, which would mean leaving behind not just the games they had learned to love, but the friendships and communities they had built through shared sporting experiences. The prospect of returning to a society where such recreational activities might not be available or approved added complexity to their feelings about going home. The final baseball season before the armistice was both celebration and farewell. Games were played with particular intensity as prisoners realized their time together was limited. The championship game in July 1953, just days before the ceasefire was signed, drew spectators from throughout the camp and featured some of the best baseball these amateur players would ever produce. Cho's team won the championship with a dramatic ninth-inning rally that he helped spark with a clutch double that drove in 2 runs. As he stood on second base, breathing hard and grinning at teammates and opponents who were cheering his hit, he realized that this moment represented something he had never expected to experience as a prisoner of war: pure, uncomplicated joy shared with people who had become genuine friends despite starting as strangers and enemies. The repatriation process that began in August 1953 marked the end of the baseball program, but not the end of its influence on the men who had participated. Prisoners were allowed to take small personal items home with them, and many chose to bring baseballs, gloves, or other equipment as tangible reminders of their unexpected sporting education. Some carried crude baseball bats they had carved themselves, planning to teach the game to family members or friends back home. The farewell ceremonies included a final exhibition game between a team of prisoners and a team of American guards, a contest that would have been unthinkable at the beginning of their captivity, but now seemed natural and appropriate. The Americans won by a comfortable margin, but the score mattered less than the symbolic significance of former enemies competing as friends and colleagues in a shared sporting tradition. Cho Min-ho stood at the rail of a repatriation ship in September 1953, holding a baseball glove that Sergeant Williams had given him as a parting gift. Around him, other former prisoners clutched similar mementos: baseballs autographed by American guards, photographs of their prison camp teams, hand-drawn diagrams of baseball plays they hoped to remember and perhaps teach to others. The North Korea they were returning to had been devastated by 3 years of intensive bombing and ground warfare. Cities lay in ruins. The infrastructure that supported organized recreational activities had been destroyed, and the population faced immediate challenges of survival and reconstruction that would leave little time for games or sports. But Cho and his fellow former prisoners carried with them more than just equipment and memories. They carried a fundamentally different understanding of what human competition could be, not just a zero-sum struggle for survival and dominance, but an opportunity for personal growth, social bonding, and mutual respect between opponents. They had learned that Americans, despite being political enemies, could be generous teachers and fair competitors who valued skill and effort over ideology and background. The baseball program had demonstrated something profound about American society, that it was confident enough to share its cultural treasures even with enemies, efficient enough to maintain recreational programs during wartime, and creative enough to use sports as a tool for building understanding across cultural and political divides. The same society that could wage sophisticated warfare could also create opportunities for play, competition, and personal development that enriched the lives of everyone involved. The story doesn't end with repatriation and the return to a devastated homeland. In the decades that followed the Korean War, some former prisoners carried their baseball knowledge with them as they rebuilt their lives and communities. While organized baseball never became popular in North Korea due to political and economic constraints, the principles these men had learned, fair competition, teamwork, respect for opponents, influenced their approach to other activities and relationships. Some former prisoners became teachers or community leaders who applied lessons learned from baseball to other group activities. Others shared their knowledge with family members, particularly children who were fascinated by stories of this strange American game where individual achievement and team success could coexist harmoniously. A few even attempted to organize informal baseball games in their communities, though such activities were necessarily limited by political considerations and resource constraints. The American guards who had participated in the baseball program also carried lasting memories of the experience. Many returned to civilian life with a different understanding of their former enemies, not as ideological robots or inhuman fanatics, but as individuals capable of learning, growing, and finding joy in unexpected circumstances. Some continued to follow baseball with enhanced appreciation for the game's power to build bridges between different kinds of people. Sergeant Williams, the Ohio coach who had started the program almost by accident, later became a high school principal who often told his students about teaching baseball to North Korean prisoners of war. His story became a powerful example of how American values, fairness, opportunity, respect for individual achievement, could transcend political boundaries and create understanding even between enemies. The baseball program had also demonstrated the importance of recreational activities in maintaining mental health and social cohesion during stressful circumstances. Military psychologists who studied the prison camps noted that facilities with active recreational programs experienced fewer behavioral problems, better prisoner cooperation, and improved overall morale compared to camps that focused solely on basic custodial functions. This insight would influence American military doctrine for decades to come, leading to the incorporation of recreational and educational programs into prisoner of war operations and military facilities more generally. The simple recognition that human beings need play, competition, and social interaction even in the most difficult circumstances became an accepted principle of effective military management and humanitarian treatment. But perhaps the most profound legacy of the Korean War baseball program lay in its demonstration that cultural exchange could occur even under the most unlikely circumstances. The prisoners who learned to play America's pastime hadn't been converted to capitalism or democracy, but they had gained appreciation for American approaches to competition, individual achievement, and social organization that influenced their understanding of human possibilities. The wooden bat no longer felt foreign in experienced hands. The rules no longer seemed arbitrary and confusing, and the joy of connecting solidly with a well-thrown pitch had become as natural as any childhood pleasure. The game had transcended its origins as a prisoner management tool to become a genuine form of cultural diplomacy that created lasting bonds between people who might otherwise have remained enemies forever. Today, baseball is played throughout Asia, including in South Korea where it has become one of the most popular sports. While North Korea remains largely isolated from international sporting culture, the seeds planted during those prison camp games of the early 1950s demonstrated that even the deepest political divisions couldn't prevent human beings from finding common ground through play, competition, and shared effort toward common goals. The prison camp baseball diamond was dismantled after the armistice, the improvised equipment was packed away, and the players returned to their separate worlds. But the connections they had made, the skills they had learned, and the understanding they had gained about the power of sport to unite rather than divide would influence their lives and communities for decades to come. That perhaps is the ultimate lesson of the Korean War prison camp baseball program. That sometimes the most effective diplomacy happens not through formal negotiations or political agreements, but through the simple act of teaching someone to swing a bat, catch a fly ball, and celebrate both individual achievement and team success. The game had ended, the players had gone home, but the spirit of fair competition and mutual respect they had learned would prove more durable than any political system and more powerful than any ideology ever created by human minds seeking to divide rather than unite the human family. The crack of the bat, the cheer of teammates, and the satisfaction of a game well played had demonstrated that even enemies could find common ground on a baseball diamond, playing America's pastime under the summer sun while war raged beyond the fences and friendship bloomed in the most unlikely circumstances imaginable.